Hey guys, welcome to class on your own again. So today we're going to talk about how to be a good ruler, as you can see right there. First of all, this room is so cold right now that if you hear my teeth chattering, just ignore that. That's just my body shutting down from the freezingness in here. So I'm going to have to get animated just to make this stay a little warm. So we're going to talk about a couple things today. We're going to talk about the military revolution, how sort of the changes in how war is fought changes everything. I know I say it a lot in this class, the Reformation changed everything, but it really is the case that there's sort of the stability, and it's just like one little thing changes, and then there's like a domino effect, a cascade of other changes. So the military revolution, then we're going to talk about then how that plays itself out in terms of the costs of fighting wars. And we're going to look at the Spanish Empire during this time, the Habsburgs. And then last of all, we're going to talk about what actually sort of the ideas about what it means to be a good ruler at that point. All right. Who knows if I explained that very well? I don't know. Let's just get after it. Let's start with the military revolution. Why is this not working? Hold on. I think I broke something. Oh, I know I did wrong. Sorry, guys. Don't worry about it. This is all part of the story. I just don't want to start over again. There we go. I wonder it wasn't working very well. Okay, see? Now we're going. Military revolution. So let's go back to the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages, they had this thing called feudalism. I'm sure you guys studied a little bit, if not a lot. Feudalism, essentially, there is a king, but the king's not like in charge. The king just can call the lords and all that to come fight battles, and then at the end of the season they go back to their places. And the king is sort of the first among equals as opposed to sort of the guy in charge. So that's feudalism. It's what we call a decentralized military organization. It is essentially that lord's knights and that lord's knights and that lord's knights, and if you can convince them all to show up for the war, then that's your army, and then at the end they kind of go home again. It's very decentralized. Yes, the king is nominally in charge, but not like sort of hierarchically. All right, great. Decentralized military organization, and it's really centered around heavy cavalry. So like the knight on horseback in that heavy armor. And that's the main thing. They go charging in. You know, arrows might fly and things like that, but it just bounces off the armor. They show up with the soldiers, and you're up on horseback with armor on. You're just slaughtering those guys. They can't do much. So the knight is really the thing. And in fact, wars are really fought between knights. They weren't huge affairs in terms of the numbers of people that we're going to see at some point. Great. This is not a Middle Ages class. We're just setting this up as where is the power in this system? The power is in the hands of the nobility. They get to decide whether they show up and honor their commitment to the king or not. They're the ones in charge of the knights and things like that. The power is decentralized. Great. 15th century. So somewhere around the time this class starts, the old ways of war just aren't working anymore. This is sort of exhibited in something called the 100 Years' War between Britain and France. You don't need to know all this stuff. But here's some of the reasons, here's some of the quote-unquote technological reasons why things, if you're a knight on horseback, you're no longer successful as you were 200 years ago. One is this invention of this thing called pikesmen. I don't know if invention is the right word. This strategic change. Pikesmen are just these guys that hold poles. Like that right there. Now here's the deal, right? I'm on my horse, I come charging into a bunch of people, no big deal. If they're all holding these spiky poles, my horse is dead. And then I'm dead because I fell off my horse. Once I'm off my horse, I'm just this dude in a tin can, I'm gonna get tore up. So all you gotta do is give commoners a bunch of poles, convince them to stand there while knights are running at them, you know, stand there together, and then they face this wall, and then all of a sudden the heavy cavalry aren't that useful anymore. Another thing is gunpowder. Now, at this point, they don't really have a means of getting, like, firing guns or things like that because they haven't quite perfected the metallurgy. You know, the cannon, a gun would just sort of blow up. A cannon would just sort of blow up. But you can still use this to take down, for example, the walls of a castle. You can sort of, the castle's not moving, you just sort of hit, you can set something up that will kind of hit that, and yeah, great. And then mercenaries. It's going to be less, the rulers are going to, are less often going to call the knights and say, show up and come fight, you owe me loyalty. And rather what they'll do is they'll take money in exchange, and then they'll hire soldiers, mercenaries. So that changes the game a little bit as well. But even moving forward a little bit more to the 16th century, so you got these changes happening in the 15th century. Now in the 16th century, which we're talking about right now, the 1500s, the armies start to grow larger and more centrally organized for all the reasons we just talked about there. And one of the big technologies we're going to get by the 1500s is they're going to be able to take that gunpowder and channel it better. So these things called firearms. So, okay, big deal. So we got these things called guns now. And they really don't move that fast. Like, you can fire a gun and then it takes a couple minutes to reload it and then fire it again. It doesn't feel like that's going to change things all that much. So why does it change things? Because what it does is it allows for increased mobility and firepower. So for example, knights are going to give way to these guys here, which they have guns. They're going to be on horseback. They're going to ride in, fire their guns, and then turn around, come back out here, way away from the fighting, reload their gun, and then come back in, and then just kind of do that over and over again. It's a very different way of fighting than the knights, and it's just sort of, you're fast, you're mobile. The other thing about this is, well, just hold on to that for a second. To pull this off, it's going to require greater military discipline. So take these guys over here. Now, when we think about war today, we sort of think about, you know, individual soldiers sort of fire when they are, you know, you're in a battle, you know, you come around the corner, you fire, and then that guy over there maybe fires or something like that. That's not how wars were fought at this point, because again, today, the bullet just automatically goes back into the gun. So if it's going to take me a couple minutes to reload, what's going to happen is, and you may have seen this in movies, so you have a line. You'll have a line of musketeers or whatever you want to say, people with guns, riflemen, okay? And they will all fire at once. They'll all fire at once, and then they'll step back, and another group will come forward and will fire. And there's usually 3 groups here, and so what they'll do is they'll rotate. So while these guys are firing, moving forward, and then they fire together, this group here goes back and they reload their gun. And so you have 3 doing that, and that sort of keeps up a steady thing. This only works. This is like, you know, dance in a way. It only works if you can sort of coordinate this, which requires military discipline. Because after I fired my gun, I am a sitting duck. And I'm, you know, the idea here is I want to just get out of there. It's going to require discipline to get the soldier to walk back there, reload the gun, step back up, all sort of coordinated with the rest of them. If you stay coordinated, it works really well. If you don't, the whole thing falls apart. So you need this military discipline. And then things like individual valor and glory, like that's what the knights were all about. Like, I'm fighting for honor and chivalry and all that kind of crap. You know, I am this great knight who wins jousting contests, and that's the honor and the glory. That's out. That's no longer the case. This doesn't require a lot of honor and glory. It requires coordination. So who's going to fight? The knight's not going to go out there and fight anymore. If I'm not getting anything out of this, I'm not going to risk myself, because the knights are rich people. I don't know if you realize that, but the knights were the wealthy in the society. So that's no good. So how do you get soldiers? Where are these soldiers going to come from? 2 places. I already talked about. One is mercenaries, and these have to be paid for. And so the knight, instead of going out there and fighting for nothing, from his point of view, he'd rather give the ruler money to go hire soldiers than to show up himself and put himself in danger. And then the other thing is going to be conscription, because now I don't need some wealthy nobleman to fire a gun. I can take any guy off the street. Any peasant can sort of figure this out. I just need to train them. So conscription. So I'm going to take, you know, a certain percentage of the farmers are going to go out there, and they're going to be the ones to do this. The conscription means just like drafting. Drafting's not the right word. They just sort of take them and say, look, you're in the army now. Congratulations. all this is going to need, and here's the key thing I want to point about this. It's not that I care about how wars are fought per se. The reason this is important is because all this stuff is going to require way more logistical coordination. Now you're going to have soldiers that have to be trained. They don't just show up to fight when it's time to fight and then go home. They got to be around so you can train them, which means you got to feed them, you got to clothe them, you have to put uniforms on them, you have to house them. This is all going to take money, and it's all going to take constant logistical stuff to make sure that this can sort of work, which requires a government that doesn't just say, okay, we're going to go fight a war now, war's over, go home. It has to basically keep this machine going. That's going to require money, that's going to require logistics, it's just crazy. And it's going to be, the wars are going to be much more expensive because it's going to require more people as you start going through this. And so, how are you going to pay for this? Only the ruler can really afford this. I mean, the ruler's not rich, but the ruler's got a little more money than everybody else. And so it feels like letting the ruler take this feels like the best way to go. I'll chip in my bit, and you chip in your bit, and the ruler will kind of be in charge of this. But the ruler's going to need, at the very least, the ruler's going to need some sort of bureaucracy of taxation to make sure that the money's coming in and being spent. But it's going to need all the other things that go with it. We start to get what we think of today as a government. That didn't really exist before this. It was more a household of the king. It was, the king and a few servants and a few people around, but it wasn't like a central government like we think of now. But now it's becoming more centralized. The state has to become the manager of the economy. It's not just about running the military. The military only will function if the economy is functioning well. You have to be able to afford to fight wars. And so you have to now, if the economy can't be a thing you just sort of let happen and just, take your cut. You have to manage this economy. It has to be something that keeps sort of developing. And then the state, like I was saying, has to become more centrally bureaucratized. We get much more of a centralized state. The king starts to become something that we now think of as a king, where there is more of a hierarchy, where that guy is in charge. Not just sort of first among equals, but first. This in turn, and this is not going to be that important for us today, but it's going to be important as we move forward, because we're going to find that balance between the king and nobility that was in the Middle Ages starts to go away. The nobility gets weakened and the king and queens get strengthened. And why that matters, we're going to find out a little bit later. But that's going to change not just military, not just politics, but social, cultural, all sorts of things are going to change as a result of that. When we study Louis XIV in France after the first exam, you're going to sort of see that. So here's the bottom line about the military revolution. The changing techniques of war, so just technology of war is changing, how war is fought changes, is going to change the techniques of statecraft, which changes everything. That's the bottom line I want you to get out of this. Is that how wars were fought changes a lot of things in Europe at this point. Okay.